came back and we started this off, I told you guys about a peer-led class that we were having at Valley View, that I was part of the crew that was kind of tasked with preparing the material for that class. And that class has been awesome throughout this whole summer. We've had really good feedback. We've had a lot of good participation from people that we, because of old class setups, didn't get to hear from in the past, but now everyone's together and we're kind of being able to share ideas with one another, and it's just gone really, really well. But I want to give you guys a look into what we're doing this coming Wednesday, because if you remember when I was telling you guys about that, the sermons that I'm bringing you on Sunday nights are kind of related material to what we're going to be talking about this coming Wednesday. And it's actually been really, really helpful for me because it's helped me get a good base of knowledge for what we'll be talking about on Wednesday. So being able to come here and kind of like proof my stuff with you guys has been really, really useful to me. So this coming Wednesday, we're going to be talking about, I've been trying to think of what I formally want to call this class. We're going to be talking about, I guess, reputation, public image, and more importantly, how that stuff influences your witness. So it's like basically how your actions influence your witness to the world. And one of the examples in Scripture that I thought would be a really good place to go to get some biblical source material for this was the story of Daniel. Daniel is a book really about many things, and there are lots of really notable stories in the book of Daniel. You get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, God's curse on Nebuchadnezzar that turns him into a were creature that makes him feral and wild and makes him go live out in the wilderness and grow long claws and stuff like that. It's crazy. This is a story in the Bible, and this happens to the king of Babylon. God curses him with this craziness. And then you get the hand that shows up and writes on the wall in the palace. And then the kind of one that everyone knows, Daniel in the lion's den. And so you get all these crazy stories that are all packed into Daniel, and so you have lots to choose from when you go to Daniel to try to get some source material. But all things considered, all of these awesome stories that we get to pull from Daniel, this book is really a story about a talented young man taken away from his home, made to serve a foreign king. And through this progression, we get to see Daniel turn into one of the most influential and powerful men in the world. So, at the beginning of the book, we are introduced to King Nebuchadnezzar, the same king who will later be cursed with this were creature craziness. And we get to have the stage set a little bit for us. So Israel is in the throes of another corrective cycle of exile. So they do something wrong, and God tells them that you guys are doing something wrong, you need to stop, and then they don't. And so God kind of punishes them in a way. He corrects them, usually through outside influence that comes in and kind of ruins whatever Israel has going. And so this King Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylonian army, they lay siege to Jerusalem, and they capture the city. They overrun God's people. And like many smart conquering nations back in Daniel's day, King Nebuchadnezzar decides that he wants to take an approach to occupation that is less costly on Babylon. Traditionally, in the past, you have occupation that was pretty much achieved solely through like military presence and brute force. So that meant a lot of people there in the land that you conquered that you'd have to pay and feed, and you had to keep all these men garrisoned there. But that's really expensive, and people get tired of that after a while. And so what the smart conqueror does is he takes the wealthy, the well-educated, the noble of the land that he has conquered, and he brings them into his land, into Babylon. And basically what he does is he indoctrinates them into becoming good Babylonian citizens that promote Babylonian virtues and culture, and then he pushes them back out into the Israelite culture. And so you get all these fancy, powerful people who are now sympathizers to Babylon, who are back in with the rest of the Israelite population, who influence their Israelite brothers to basically be sympathizers towards the Babylonian presence as well. So Nebuchadnezzar's plan is to assimilate the movers and the shakers of the Israelite nation. And we get to see this laid out for us. Daniel chapter 1, we'll read verses 1 through 7. This kind of sets a bunch of context for everything that I just told you guys about. This book is definitely not without its fair share of crazy names that are super hard to read. So if I butcher a couple of these, please don't hold it against me too much. Okay, so Daniel chapter 1, starting in verse 1, says, "During the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia and placed them in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Nebuchadnezzar tells him, select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men. He said, make sure that they are well-versed in every branch of learning and are gifted with knowledge and good judgment and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and the literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens, and they were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter royal service. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of these young men, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. Okay, so we'll stop there. So that's just the story that I was telling you guys about right there from the scriptures. So, we kind of get the stage set for us on what's happening in Daniel's time, that he has been taken to Babylon and is kind of within this process of indoctrination because he met the criteria that the king issued out to his chief of staff. And so these men, we get to see the story of kind of 4 of them, but there are tons and tons more. It would take hundreds of thousands of people for this to work correctly, but we get to look at these 4 guys. So these 4 men are to be trained and kind of set aside to be servants and advisors to the king, to be immersed in this culture and this knowledge of the foreign people that have taken them, a culture that behaves differently than they do, and a culture that believes differently than they do. And they do things that really don't line up with what the Israelites think and believe. And I think as I continue to describe this situation, this may start to sound a little bit familiar to some of us. To be immersed in a culture that doesn't exactly understand, get what we are, who we are. A culture that doesn't prioritize the things that we prioritize and doesn't practice the things that we practice. That makes their decisions based on a different criteria than we make our decisions based on. And this isn't just me having this realization. Over and over again in the Bible, we get built up on this expectation that if we are doing what we are commanded to be doing as Christians correctly, then we're going to become kind of different than the world that we are placed in. We'll become outsiders in a way, different from the world around us. In good ways, though. We'll be uncommonly merciful and gracious to those who we interact with, uncommonly sacrificial and generous, uncommonly particular about what we say and what we do and what we think, and uncommonly filled with hope and joy and love. And so, because of that identifying mark, I hope that this idea of being a fish out of water, like Daniel and his friends, I hope that sounds a little bit familiar to us. Because when we look around us at the world that we live in today, it seems like every day it gets a little bit stranger to us, a little bit less like we are. It seems like our worldview, the Christian worldview, is quickly becoming the worldview of an endangered species. Maybe one who doesn't hold the majority anymore. And for a while, it kind of wasn't like that. Historically, our sense of community, politics, national policies, even the media that was put out in the United States, movies, music, art, for the majority of our Western history, all of those things have been strongly influenced by or even endorsed by our Judeo